Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Day 25 of the war, and Israel has gone missing from the map. All thanks to China. We'll explain what happened here. Meanwhile, Hamas has released a new hostage video. More tanks are rolling into Gaza. More sirens are going off in Israel. Netanyahu has rejected calls for a ceasefire, and Europe is divided on who or what it should support. This war has put the world on edge. India is looking to secure oil supplies, and this time it is turning to Venezuela. But here's what India is failing to secure: the data of its citizens. A new breach has come to light. It's being called the country's biggest ever. The data of 800 million Indians is said to have been compromised. In Pakistan, as terror attacks grow, the government has resorted to a new tactic: deporting tens of thousands of Afghan refugees. We'll tell you how the Taliban has responded to this. The US is building its biggest nuclear bomb yet. King Charles is in Kenya, and the country is waiting to hear him say sorry. Also, why is the US bulk buying Japanese fish? All these stories and more coming up. The headlines first. A suspected gunman has been detained in Japan. He took at least 2 people hostage. The police captured him after a lengthy standoff. Japan is one of the world's strictest regulations on gun ownership. Canada has banned Chinese super app WeChat on official government devices, citing cybersecurity risks. Earlier this year, Canada also banned TikTok on its official devices. US President Joe Biden has issued a sweeping executive order to regulate artificial intelligence. AI developers must notify the government about their work, also share safety test results. This comes amid growing concerns about the potential risks of AI. Chinese President Xi Jinping has a new message for women. He is asking them to cultivate a new culture of marriage and childbearing. This comes amid Beijing dealing with an aging population and record decline in birth rate. Thailand will offer visa-free entry to tourists from India. Indian visitors can now stay for up to 30 days without a visa. The 6-month trial will start from next month. Thailand is trying to rebuild its tourism sector that was battered by the pandemic. Saudi Arabia all set to host the 2034 Football World Cup. Australia abandoned its bid. Riyadh and Canberra were the only 2 parties bidding for the event. Australia's decision comes just hours ahead of the FIFA deadline. And football superstar Lionel Messi wins his record 8th Ballon d'Or. He led Argentina to the World Cup last year in Qatar, and the 36-year-old won the top men's player award ahead of Manchester City forward Erling Haaland.
הם אנושים חדורי צביעות ושקר. זה חסר את המילים על הבנק. אני מזכיר לכם.
It's day 25 of the war, and pressure is building on both sides. Israeli soldiers are now deep inside Hamas territory. They're moving in on Gaza City. And from the looks of it, the plan is to lay siege. Tanks have been spotted in the north. They've also cut off a key road to the south. So what is the Hamas doing? Trying to leverage the hostages. That was always their trump card. Hamas holds more than 200 hostages in Gaza. They've talked about a ceasefire in exchange for the hostages. And now they've released a video, a new video. It features 3 of the hostages. It's a direct message to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
אנחנו יודעים שהייתה אמורה להיות הפסקת אש, היית אמור לשחרר את כולנו, התחייבת לשחרר את כולנו, ובמקום זה אנחנו נושאים במחדל הפוליטי, ביטחוני, צבאי, מדיני שלך. אזרחים שמשלמים מיסים למדינת ישראל נמצאים בשבי. אתה הורג אותנו, אתה תהרוג, אתה רוצה להרוג את כולנו, אתה רוצה עם צה"ל להרוג את כולנו.
So the hostages are blaming Netanyahu. They want him to stop the offensive. They want him to negotiate instead. But will he listen? The Prime Minister was combative on Monday. He completely ruled out a ceasefire in Gaza. He also said ground operations are the best way to get the hostages back. Listen to this.
The ground action actually creates the possibility, not the certainty, but the possibility of getting our hostages out. Because Hamas will not do it unless they're under pressure. They simply will not do it. They only do it under pressure. This creates pressure. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen.
He's got a point there. Israel did manage to get one hostage out, a female soldier who was captured by Hamas. She was kidnapped during the attack on October 7th. But now she's back home safely, all because of the ground offensive. Having said that, it's just one instance. What happens if the offensive escalates or if the siege tightens? That's the worry for Netanyahu. Also, public support is falling by the day. After the Hamas attack, right after the attack, most of Israel wanted to invade and occupy Gaza. One poll showed 65% support. But now that same sample has been tested again, and this time only 46% support an invasion. So the risk is obvious. Israel is already blaming Netanyahu for the intelligence failure. If things go wrong in Gaza, they will blame him again. Will the Prime Minister risk that? Well, so far he's not backed down. More and more Israeli assets are pouring into Gaza. Take a look at this footage. It was released by the Israeli army. So what comes next? According to Israel, more escalation. That's what's coming next. Their aim is to destroy the Hamas rule in Gaza. But in the process, Gaza itself has become unrecognizable. Just debris, dirt and suffering. The death toll is around 8,300, out of which more than 3,000 are children. Let me show you some more pictures. These are dead bodies being transported on donkey carts. Why? Because there is no fuel. And no fuel means no ambulances. At the hospital, things are worse. Doctors say they're operating in corridors now.
As you can see now, we are performing surgeries in the corridor of the surgical suites because all the suites are full. From 7 o'clock this morning, we received a large number of injured patients who needed immediate surgery. There are surgeries here in the corridors in addition to those taking place in the 4 surgical suites. The surgeons performing these operations are of course tired and exhausted, but someone needed to handle these patients' cases.
Now you may be wondering, where is the aid? Well, trucks are still going in, but it's simply not enough. Since the Rafah crossing opened, the crossing with Egypt, it opened a few days back, 144 aid trucks have entered Gaza. 144 aid trucks, including 26 on Monday. But to give you some context, 500 trucks used to enter daily before the war. So 26 doesn't even begin to cut it. And what's plan B? The United Nations wants Israel to allow aid through its borders, specifically this one. It's called the Kerem Shalom crossing. The UN says this crossing will allow more trucks to enter Gaza because it is more equipped to handle the traffic. An appeal was made at the United Nations Security Council. You can only imagine what happened next. A blame game between Arab countries and Israel.
They want to depopulate the Gaza Strip completely from the entire population and throw them in the lap of Egypt in the Sinai Desert. No one should justify our killing or find reasons to give more time to the killer. Call for an end of this assault.
Some of you have forgotten why this body was established. So I will remind you, from this day on, Each time you look at me, you will remember what staying silent in the face of evil means. Just like my grandparents and the grandparents of millions of Jews, from now on, my team and I will wear yellow stars.
So the Israeli envoy is wearing a yellow star. Why is this important? Because the yellow star has a dark history. The Nazis made Jews wear the star to target them, to single them out. It was a sign of Jewish persecution. But not everyone is a fan of the Israeli envoy's decision. Like Dani Dayan, he's the chairperson of Israel's Holocaust Museum, and he says it's a wrong move. It dishonors both the Holocaust victims, and Israel. But such is propaganda. It's not about whether it's true or justified. It's about the impact. And Israel has always aced this game. They have shaped public opinion at crucial times. But this time they may have crossed a red line. Pro-Israel advertisements are now appearing in children's games. I'm talking about games like Angry Birds and Subway Surfers. Most of the ads look like this. At least 6 such ads have been spotted, mostly in Europe. Now, Israel says it has no idea how this happened. They admitted to making the ads, but not putting them in games. I'm afraid that's a hard sell. Reports say Israel has spent $1.5 million on ads since the October 7th attack. 1.5 million in 25 days on ads. Even Google and Twitter are running Israeli ads. It tells you how important opinion and sentiment is. Without that, you cannot win wars. And Hamas knows this too. Hence their decision to release the hostage video. And Israel also knows this. Hence their $1 million ad budget. It's a dangerous and risky game, but also the reality of modern warfare. Now let's talk about China. It is desperate to have a role in this conflict. Soon after the first rockets were fired, China dispatched a special envoy to West Asia. It even offered to mediate. And remember, this is far away from China's traditional sphere of influence. It's because Xi Jinping wants to be more than a spectator. He wants to be a player in the region, someone who can shape outcomes. But that may not happen anymore, especially after what has come to light today. China has pulled off a new stunt. It has deleted Israel from its maps. China's tech giants have done this. They've removed Israel. Let me show you some screen grabs. Now look closely. Israel is not on these maps. Yes, you can see the borders and cities. The disputed territories are clearly divided. There are clear demarcations between Israeli and Palestinian territories. Israel's neighbors have been identified. You can see Lebanon on this map. You can see Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. But there is no Israel. And which maps are we talking about? These are not Google Maps, because Google Maps is blocked in China. They have their own copies and clones of everything. In China, 2 companies provide mapping services, Baidu and Alibaba. They've both deleted Israel. And here's how it came to light. When internet users in China checked their maps, they could not find Israel. So is this a software bug or a political salvo? The debate is on in China. These maps, with Israel missing, are trending on Chinese platforms. And now they're making headlines the world over, but their makers remain silent. Neither Baidu nor Alibaba have bothered to explain what happened here. And it's hard to believe that this is a bug, because China is quite serious about its maps. They're a tool for the Communist Party. China weaponizes maps. It uses maps to assert territorial claims, also to convey its policy positions. And internet companies simply toe the Communist Party line. So you can say that these maps reflect China's worldview. And now they do not show Israel. What message do you think Beijing is trying to send? China's foreign ministry was asked about this. Their response was vague. It said, China and Israel have quote-unquote normal diplomatic relations, and I'm quoting again, relevant countries are on China's standard maps. Does that mean Israel is not a relevant country? Either way, the statement does not answer the question. But that's China for you. When faced with an uncomfortable question, they deflect. And in case you're wondering where China stands on the Israel-Hamas war, it says it is a neutral party. Listen in.
The position of the Chinese government on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is very clear. We are calling for a ceasefire as soon as possible, the protection of civilians, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state.
But anti-Semitism is surging in China, and it seems to have state support. You see, Chinese internet is tightly controlled, and right now it is aflush with hate against Israel. What's more, this hate is being driven by influential voices, like Hu Xijin, former editor of the Global Times. Recently, an Israeli minister criticized the Hezbollah. Hu Xijin decided to weigh in, and this is what he said, I'm quoting, "Oh, calm down, Israel. I'm worried you'll wipe the earth out of the solar system." China's state mouthpieces are broadcasting similar messages. Recently, a Chinese state broadcaster hosted a discussion. It was about how Jews control wealth in America. And this really is a reflection of how China sees Israel through the lens of its relationship with the US. China has a rather narrow view of Israel. Ally of America, so cannot be a friend of China. That's the popular belief. That's how they see Israel. And Beijing is feeding into this. If China wants, it can censor the hate speech. It can also get its mouthpieces to focus on the relationship with Israel. But it's doing none of this. From the wrong maps to the skewed public opinion, all of it has China's tacit support. And Israel should take note. Their prime minister should take note. In 2017, remember, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited China and he described their relationship as a marriage made in heaven. Well, that comment has not aged well. So China is backing Palestine. Meanwhile, Europe cannot make up its mind. And I must say it's not surprising. We're talking about 27 countries here. 27 countries are part of the European Union. All of them have a different role in this conflict. So consensus is hard. But forget country to country differences. Even within governments, there is no consensus. You may remember this minister from Spain. Her name is Ione Belarra. She's a staunch critic of Israel. The Israeli government asked Spain to rein her in, but Madrid is doing the very opposite. The minister is now doubling down. Listen to her latest comments.
Suspend diplomatic relations with Israel, apply economic sanctions against Netanyahu and the entire political leadership. Also carry out an arms embargo and, of course, bring Netanyahu before the International Criminal Court, where he can be tried for what he is, a war criminal.
She wants Netanyahu to be sanctioned, to be dragged to the International Criminal Court, and she is not alone. Israel's actions have divided European governments, not just in the EU, but even outside. In Britain, a lawmaker of the ruling party has been fired from his job. His name is Paul Bristow. He was working as a ministerial aide, but last week he wrote a letter to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and in that letter, he called for a ceasefire in Gaza. Days later, he got fired. Same with the Labour MP, Andy MacDonald. He spoke at a pro-Palestine rally recently. He was later accused of anti-Israel hatred. So the Labour Party had to suspend him. But the party itself is split. Their leader, Keir Starmer, says it is not the time for a ceasefire. But his senior MPs disagree. At least 35 of them are demanding a ceasefire, including 13 shadow ministers. Now, these divisions are all internal. The leadership can iron them out. What they cannot iron out are differences at the European Union. We have multiple camps there. The likes of Germany and Austria are Team Israel. You can understand why. Their actions led to Jews being driven out of Europe, so now they support Israel, Germany and Austria. Another camp supports Palestine. This includes Ireland, Spain, Portugal and Luxembourg. They don't mind criticizing Israel. And finally, you have the third camp, the centrists. This includes the likes of France and the Netherlands. They don't mind a ceasefire, but they believe in Israel's right to self-defense. These differences were exposed at two recent events. One was the EU summit. The second was the UN General Assembly vote. Let's deal with the EU summit first. Germany was completely opposed to the word ceasefire, so the EU leaders debated the next best thing, a humanitarian pause. But even then, one issue remained. Would it be humanitarian pauses or just a pause? That's right, EU leaders could not agree on plural or singular, pauses or pause. It tells you how deep the divisions run. Same thing happened at the United Nations. The General Assembly was debating a ceasefire resolution. Just look at how the results panned out. Austria, Czechia, Hungary and Croatia opposed the ceasefire. They voted no. Germany, Poland, Italy and the Netherlands abstained. France, Portugal and Spain agreed to it. They wanted a ceasefire. Now try making sense of this. Every major European power has a different position. Forget same page, they're not even on the same book. The question is why? And the reason, one of the reasons is history. Like I said, Germany has a reason to support Israel. Likewise, Ireland has a reason to support Palestine. Their leaders often talk about shared struggles. But beyond history, there are contemporary reasons as well. We can think of 4 of them. Number 1, the domestic support for Palestine. We've seen major protests across European capitals in London, Berlin, Madrid, Rome. And these protests influence leaders. After all, they have elections to win. Reason number 2, overburden. There's already a war happening in Europe, the one between Ukraine and Russia. So all their focus is on supporting and funding Kiev. There is little appetite for another one. Reason number 3, fears of radicalism. European countries are on alert. Most of them fear lone wolf attacks by radical Islamists. Similarly, anti-Semitism is on the rise. France has reported dozens of incidents. Germany has seen a 240% rise in anti-Semitism since the 7th of October. It's 300% in Austria. And in Britain, cases have risen 13 times. If this war escalates, things could get worse. And finally, reason number 4, a wider war could hurt their economies. And oil is a major reason for that. Europe imports very little energy from Russia now, so their exposure to West Asia is much more. They buy around 1.4 million barrels of crude per day. 1.4 million every day. That's 600,000 more than before the Ukraine war. So a spillover will hurt Europe. It will hurt their energy supply, and right now they cannot afford that. Experts are warning of a European recession this year. The GDP of 20 EU countries fell by 0.1% this quarter, meaning their economies contracted. And if that happens again, it will be a technical recession. 2 straight contractions mean a recession. So Europe has its own balancing act now. History on one side and modern day politics and economics on the other. Vantage continues after a short break.
Able to woo the woman with this freebie war, freebie poster war, I would rather say, on the streets of Bhopal, we would know on December the 3rd. I am joined by Madhya Pradesh Congress spokesperson Mr. Anand Jat. आनंद जी पूरे भोपाल में घूमे तो 2 तरह के पोस्टर का तरफ फ्रीबी वॉर लगता है, कांग्रेस का एक तरफ, कमलनाथ जी का एक तरफ, बीजेपी का। कांग्रेस कमलनाथ जी कह रहे हैं 1500 रुपए वुमन को देंगे, 500 रुपए में सिलेंडर देंगे। बीजेपी कह रही है हम तो ऑलरेडी 1250 दे रहे हैं, 3000 कर देंगे, 450 में सिलेंडर देंगे। तो क्यों आपके पोस्टर का क्यों जनता की विश्वास करेगी, बीजेपी का क्यों नहीं करेगी?
देखिए, कांग्रेस पार्टी जो कहती है वो करके रहती है, और वचन के पक्के कमलनाथ हैं एक तरफ और दूसरी तरफ घोषणावीर मामा है। तो झूठी घोषणाओं के कारण मामा ने मध्य प्रदेश को वाशिंगटन से अच्छी सड़कें अमेरिका तक में बदनाम कर रखा है। तो दोनों का कोई मैच नहीं है। दूसरी बात यह है कि जब हम देखते हैं तो 1500 रुपये हम हिमाचल प्रदेश में भी माताओं बहनों को दे रहे हैं, 500 रुपये का गैस का सिलेंडर हम राजस्थान में दे रहे हैं कांग्रेस पार्टी। तो ऐसा क्यों होगा कि मध्य प्रदेश में भाजपा 450 में गैस का सिलेंडर दे रही है और उत्तराखंड वालों ने क्या बिगाड़ दिया है जो उनको 900 रुपये का गैस का सिलेंडर दिया जा रहा है? बहुत बेसिक सा सवाल है मेरा कि महाराष्ट्र में क्यों 900 रुपये का गैस का सिलेंडर है? क्या वहाँ भाजपा की सरकार नहीं है? तो ये जैसे मोदी जी एक दिन आए थे और भोपाल में कह रहे थे कि भाजपा की सरकार है, जहाँ जहाँ है वहाँ।
Now to Pakistan and its grim headlines. Poor showing at the World Cup. Apparently, the cricket team has not been paid for 5 months. The economy remains in crisis. Inflation is still at a record high. There's a shortage of food and power and a rise in terror attacks. Now, most of these problems are Pakistan's own doing. It invested in terror factories. It used terrorism as a state policy, and now those chickens have come home to roost. But instead of dealing with the root cause, Pakistan has found a new target: refugees. Yes, Pakistan has refugees too, mostly from Afghanistan. Now, Pakistan blames them for its problems and it wants to deport them. The decision was made on the 3rd of October. It came from Pakistan's caretaker government. They set a 28-day deadline for illegal immigrants. Leave the country or you will be deported. That deadline ends tomorrow. And tens of thousands of Afghan refugees are leaving. Those who are not are scared.
If we can arrange the fare, we will leave within 5 or 6 days. But it is winter in our region there. 6 months are so cold there that God knows how these kids will bear it. Our house there is also broken. We don't have any rooms where we can live, and living in a tent in winter will be very difficult.
My husband is too scared to go out. A few days back I felt sick. My medicine was not available in the nearby market, but he did not go to get the medicine. He says he cannot go out because the police may catch him.
So how many Afghan refugees does Pakistan have? Why are they being sent back now? And what is the Taliban doing about this? Let's begin with the first question. Pakistan and Afghanistan share a long border. It is 2,670 kilometers long. It is called the Durand Line. It was drawn in 1893 by a British diplomat called Mortimer Durand. And like all borders drawn by the Brits, this too is contested. Every time there's a war in Afghanistan, thousands flee to Pakistan. The biggest wave of migration happened during the Soviet occupation. That was between 1979 to 1989. Another wave of refugees came during Taliban's first stint in power. It began in 1996. Then in 2021, there was another wave of migration. That's when the Taliban took over Afghanistan for the second time. Do you know how many people left? Some 700,000. They fled Pakistan in 2021 and since then. So put together, there are 3.7 million refugees, 3.7 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan. Most of them live in one province, the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. 1.3 million are registered as refugees. Another 800,000 have legal status to stay, which leaves us with 1.6 million more people. They do not have a refugee status. So as per the law, they cannot stay in Pakistan. But they say they don't want to return to Afghanistan.
There is a chaos in the Afghan camps in Karachi. And the people are not leaving their home, they are not leaving their community, the children are not going to their school, the students are not going to their colleges, the youngsters are not going to their job, people are not going to their businesses, and because they have a fear of becoming a victim of state harassment.
Now, these refugees have been living in Pakistan for years. So why has Islamabad suddenly decided to throw them out? Because they're a convenient group to blame. You see, Pakistan is suffering at the hands of terrorists it nurtured. In the last 1 year, Pakistan has had 24 suicide bombings. 14 of them were linked to the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, also known as the Pakistani Taliban. And the name itself is telling. Pakistan played a crucial role in raising the Taliban, especially in the early 2000s during the US occupation of Afghanistan. That's when Pakistan gave refuge to the Taliban. And the TTP is a byproduct of that relationship. The TTP was born in Pakistan, its leaders were trained in Pakistan, and now the same group is attacking Pakistan. Like I said, it's Islamabad's own doing. But instead of eradicating terrorism, it is targeting refugees, using them as a bargaining chip. And here's the deal. If Kabul reigns in the TTP, Islamabad will not threaten to displace Afghan refugees. And what does the Taliban have to say? Well, last year they did try to mediate. They brokered talks between Pakistan and the TTP. This led to a ceasefire, but it lasted only for 5 months. In August, the Taliban supreme leader issued a decree. He forbade any cross-border attacks. In September, the Taliban even detained 200 TTP fighters. But Pakistan says it's not enough because the attacks continue. So now they're resorting to a pressure tactic, threatening to deport tens of thousands of Afghans. The Taliban have called the decision inhumane. They say it will dent Afghan-Pakistan relations. But Islamabad has downplayed these tensions. It has called them, and I'm quoting, mere rivalry between cousins. If Pakistan decides to stick to the deadline, this rivalry could turn ugly. And it could change the Taliban's relationship with Pakistan forever. Our next story is about a new weapon, America's secret weapon, its most powerful nuclear bomb. The Pentagon is building it. It would cost about $10 billion and it would be 24 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima during the Second World War. The US is ready with a plan. It is awaiting congressional approval and courting its fair share of controversies. But why does America need such a weapon? And how will its adversaries respond? Does this mark a new phase in the nuclear arms race? Our next report brings you all the answers.
The year was 1945. The Second World War was raging. In August, it opened a devastating chapter in world history. The US became the first country to use an atomic bomb in war. It dropped the first bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. About 140,000 people died. 3 days later, the US detonated a second atomic bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki, killing about 74,000 people. It was catastrophic. Cut to today. The US Department of Defense has released a statement. It plans to build a new nuclear bomb called the B-6113. It will be one of the largest and strongest bombs in America's nuclear stockpile. To give you an idea, the B-6113 will be 24 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, which was a 15-kiloton bomb, and 14 times more powerful than the one dropped on Nagasaki, which was 25 kilotons. The B-61 is a nuclear gravity bomb, meaning it is dropped from an aircraft. It falls on its target by gravity, and devastation ensues. This bomb has been in service since 1968. Since then, several versions of it have been created. They all have different yields and features. The latest version was the B-6112. It was produced in 2020. 3 years later, America wants to upgrade this bomb to create the B-6113 or the 13th version. It will have a yield of 360 kilotons and will include modernized safety, security and accuracy features. It will also provide more flexibility for strategic, targeted attacks. For now, the US has simply announced its pursuit to build the bomb. It is seeking congressional approval and funding. If approved, the bomb will not increase America's nuclear stockpile, because the Pentagon plans to simply replace some of the largest and most powerful bombs like the B-61-7S and the B-83-1S and in their stead use the B-61-13. Thanks to its strength, it sounds efficient, but this plan is not without controversy. For starters, the bomb is costly. Reports say it will cost America about $10 billion. On top of that, critics argue that there is no real need for this bomb. It has a high yield. The bigger the bomb, the more the damage. All of it is not necessarily wanted. The B-6113 could cause more collateral damage than expected and in turn escalate matters. But for now, the Pentagon has its heart set on its new nuclear toy. The question is, why? Tensions are rising around the globe. In America's words, the security environment is changing and threats from potential adversaries are growing. Who are these adversaries? Mainly Russia and China, America's biggest competitors in terms of nuclear stockpiles. No one knows the exact number, but according to experts, Russia has 4,489 nuclear weapons, followed by the US with 3,708, and China with 410, and all three have been trying to increase their stockpiles. Reports say in recent years they have all built new facilities and dug new tunnels at their nuclear test sites. Since tensions are rising, and so are nuclear dangers, only time will tell if America's decision will be for better or worse.
Now let's talk about India. A major data breach has been reported in India. It says data of over 800 million Indians has been compromised. Now this database is up for sale on the dark web. The price tag is $80,000. That's according to a US cybersecurity firm. It is yet to be proven, but if true, it's quite scary. This could be India's biggest ever data breach. It was discovered earlier this month, but now we know the full scale of the breach and it's staggering. India has more than 1.4 billion people. This leak affects more than 800 million of them. So that's more than half of India's population. Their personal data has been compromised. And what does this data set include? Aadhaar numbers, which is a unique identity number. Most Indians have it. It is like the American Social Security number. It is used for identification, passport information, names, phone numbers, addresses, all of it. The database is all this information. The leak was reported by Resecurity. It's an agency discovered the leak. It says the entire database is up for sale. And who is behind the leak? We don't have a name, just an alias, PWN0001. It is being called a threat actor. It could be an individual or a group. They exploit cybersecurity vulnerabilities. They steal data, either to make money or to cause harm to individuals. And in this instance, the data is being sold for money. And if it falls into the wrong hands, the consequences could be severe. Identities of Indians could be misused. They could become victims of financial crimes. Their accounts could be compromised. Like we said, we don't know what's the source of this leak, but experts point towards the ICMR. That's the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR. Since February this year, the ICMR has been targeted. It has faced multiple cyber attack attempts. So this data could have come from the ICMR. But how did the ICMR get the data? Apparently through COVID tests. That's when the data was collected. During the pandemic, the ICMR took a lead in the COVID testing. Whenever a citizen took a test, they gave their personal IDs, usually through their Aadhaar cards. And the test result was reported to ICMR. Now, it appears that the same database has been compromised, and this is not a first, unfortunately. In June, data from the COVID vaccination portal was also breached. The database was accessible through Telegram bots. All you had to do was punch in a phone number, and the bot gave you a reply. It revealed Aadhaar numbers, passport information, and other personal details. Politicians and celebrities were hit in this breach. When the story got traction, the bot was shut down, and later a few individuals were also detained. And now there are reports of a bigger breach. They're becoming more frequent. As more Indians go online, their data is at risk. In fact, as we speak, another controversy is brewing. This one features Apple's iPhones. Many people, including opposition lawmakers in India, have received messages. They came from Apple, and the message says this: someone is trying to hack your iPhone. This comes from Apple's threat notification system. It was introduced in 2021, the system. It was to protect users. If Apple suspects your phone has been breached, it sends you a message like this. But the warning is rather vague. It says, we don't know for sure if your phone was hacked or not. In fact, just look at the first line. Apple believes you're being targeted by state-sponsored attackers. Now look at the last line. While it's possible this is a false alarm, please take this warning seriously. So it's serious, but not clear. Who is behind these hacking attempts? Were these phones compromised or not? We don't know. But it has triggered a heated political debate in India, and Apple had to weigh in then. It said the messages are not linked to, quote unquote, any specific state-sponsored hacker, meaning they don't know who's behind this. But India's opposition leaders are blaming the government. They say the government is trying to hack their phones. And what does the government say? They've launched an investigation. They've asked Apple to join the probe. But politics aside, data security is a serious issue, especially in India, because we do not have a data security law. There is no legislative framework to deal with large-scale breaches. A bill was passed in August this year, but it is yet to be notified. So Indians are using the internet without any protections, sort of like driving a car without airbags. If there's a crash, you're on your own. advantage continues after a short break.
₹100 से कम है। आप मध्य प्रदेश के किसी भी पेट्रोल पंप पर पूछ लीजिए, 109 रुपये पेट्रोल है। तो क्या मध्य प्रदेश की जो सरकार है वो भाजपा की सरकार नहीं है? ये अलग बात है कि जनता ने जनादेश नहीं दिया था, लूट की, झूठ की और सौदेबाजी की सरकार है। मध्य प्रदेश में 27 लाख किसानों की कर्ज माफी कमलनाथ जी के नेतृत्व में कांग्रेस की सरकार ने की है और 21 सितंबर 2020 को इस भाजपा की सरकार ने विधानसभा में वो बात स्वीकारी है। 15 साल तक भाजपा की सरकार रही, उसमें केवल 300 रुपये पेंशन मिलती थी, उसमें भी 150 रुपये केंद्र का अंश था। उस पेंशन को कमलनाथ जी जब मुख्यमंत्री बने तो 3 महीनों में ही हमने उसे 600 कर दिया और हम उसे बढ़ाकर 1000 करने वाले थे। अब कमलनाथ जी आएंगे तो कांग्रेस की सरकार आएगी तो हम उसे 1200 करने वाले हैं। तो यहाँ हमने दिखाया, ये एक और बड़ी बात है। 18 साल से मध्य प्रदेश में भाजपा की सरकार है, तो शिवराज चौहान जी को 18 साल लाडली बहनों की याद नहीं आई? जब कोरोना में जनता संकट में थी तो सरकार ने कोई राहत नहीं दी। अब शिवराज चौहान की सत्ता संकट में है, भाजपा की सत्ता संकट में है, तो उन्हें लाडली बहनों की याद आ रही है, राहत याद आ रही है। इसका ये मतलब है कि शिवराज चौहान संकट में है, उनकी सरकार संकट में है, क्योंकि अगर राहत देना होता तो कोरोना में देते।
वी आर जॉइंड बाय बीजेपी एमपी स्पोक्सपर्सन मिस्टर मिलन भार्गव। मिलन जी, पूरे आप भोपाल में घूमे तो एक पोस्टर वॉर टाइप का लगता है। कमलनाथ जी के पोस्टर लगे हैं, बोल रहे हैं 1500 रुपए वुमेन को देंगे, 500 रुपए में सिलेंडर देंगे। एक तरफ पे मोदी जी के पोस्टर लगे हैं कि 1250 दे रहे हैं, 3000 कर देंगे और 450 में सिलेंडर देंगे। तो जनता जो है किसकी बातों पे ज्यादा विश्वास करे? वादे भी एक जैसे ही लग रहे हैं आप दोनों के।
देखिए, दोनों में जो मूल अंतर है वो सबसे बड़ा अंतर है, एक सरकार में है और एक विपक्ष में है। जो विपक्ष जो 15 माह पहले 2018 में चुनकर आया था, मध्य प्रदेश की जनता बहुत बेहतर से जानती है। उन्होंने पहले भी वचन किए थे कि ये देंगे, युवाओं को बेरोजगारी 4000 भत्ता देंगे, लेकिन एक भी बेरोजगारी भत्ता नहीं मिला। युवाओं को ढोल चलाने और बैंड बजाने की ट्रेनिंग देने की कमलनाथ जी ने बात करी। किसानों को 2 लाख कर्ज माफ करने की कमलनाथ जी ने बात की थी, किसी भी एक किसान का कर्ज माफ नहीं हुआ। राहुल गांधी आए थे उस समय, इस समय उन्होंने प्रियंका गांधी जी को बुलाया और कहा कि नई घोषणाएं करिए, क्योंकि राहुल गांधी जी की घोषणा हम पूरी नहीं कर पाए। और मध्य प्रदेश की बीजेपी सरकार वो है जिसने सारी घोषणाओं को पूरा भी किया और जो वचन हमने कहिए थे, जो घोषणाएं हमने की थी, हमारा शीर्ष नेतृत्व आया माननीय अमित शाह जी के द्वारा रिपोर्ट कार्ड जनता के बीच रखा है। ये हमारी दम है। हम पोस्टर में काम नहीं करते, हम धरातल पर काम करते। वो पोस्टर में कर एक जरूर बहलाकर वोट हत्याना चाह रहा है, लेकिन मध्य प्रदेश की जनता बहुत बेहतर जानती है कि किसने काम किया, किसने नहीं किया।
In Bhopal, in poll-bound Madhya Pradesh, there's a virtual poster war on the streets of the state capital. Behind me, you can see the poster of Mr. Kamal Nath saying that Sashakt Beti Samrit Nari, the Congress big promise of rupees 1500 for women per month and a gas cylinder at rupees 500. But just in the front of it, you will see the posters of the BJP. BJP promising the ongoing Ladli Behna Yojana of the BJP at rupees 1250 per month for women in the state, and with Mr. Big picture of Mr. Modi, the BJP promising that this amount will be increased to rupees 3000 in due course if the BJP comes again to power. Go across Bhopal and you will find these two kind of posters all over the city, some of them juxtaposed against each other, both.
Here's another risk that India is bracing for: supply disruptions in the oil market. Because West Asia is at war and the war could spill over. It could draw in regional players. These are all oil producing countries. Almost the entire planet depends on West Asia for oil. In fact, 4 of the top 10 oil exporting nations in the world are in West Asia. 4 of the top 10. So if this war spreads, oil prices will soar. In fact, they're already higher compared to this time last year. And Israel has just begun the ground offensive. There's no telling how long this will last. So India is trying to secure supplies. And this time, India is looking at Venezuela, the South American nation. It is home to some of the world's largest oil reserves. But in recent years, it has also seen political turmoil. The West is not friends with the Venezuelan president. They accuse him of hurting democracy. They say his election was not free and fair. So America imposed sanctions on Venezuela. That was in 2019. Until then, India used to buy oil from Venezuela. 5 to 7% of crude imports to India came from Venezuela until 2019. But the American sanctions stopped all of that. India was forced to halt the business. And India has major business interests in Venezuela, especially India's public sector companies. They have stakes in Venezuelan oil fields. They're also owed money from their investments. And this is money that they've not been able to collect, all because of American sanctions. But this month, those sanctions were lifted. So Venezuela can sell oil in the global market again. And India is keen to buy again, that too at heavily discounted prices. It's an opportunity for India in two ways. One, you diversify the oil risk, and two, you save costs. In fact, India has been playing it smart in the oil market for a while now. Just look at the numbers. This is the latest government data. India has imported more crude this September than last. So more crude in September this year than last year, about 4.8 million barrels more. Also, prices are higher compared to last year. Yet, India spent less on imports. Let me repeat that. Oil costs more now. India has also bought more, but India's import bill is lower. In September last year, it was $11.8 billion. In the same month this year, it's $10.9 billion. How did India do this? Thanks to Russia. It has become India's biggest oil supplier. Imports from Russia have increased since February last year, since the war in Ukraine began. India has been buying more Russian oil. Earlier, the top suppliers were Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Now it's Russia. India pivoted to Russia to maximize savings. It also lowered the risk of dependence on West Asia. And now West Asia looks like a risky bet. So India is looking to tap Venezuela. This will insulate Indian consumers from the chaos in West Asia. It will also look at Russia's latest demands, address those demands. We've been telling you about them. When the oil trade first boomed last year, Russia was accepting payments in Indian rupees. But now it has a lot of rupees and nowhere to spend them. So Russia has a new demand. It wants oil payments in the yuan, the Chinese currency. India, of course, does not want that. Two reasons for that: politics and economics. Relations with China are not good. It tried to invade India in 2020 and maintains an aggressive posture. That's the politics. And from the business perspective, the oil will become more expensive. Converting rupees to the Chinese yuan will add to the cost. And this will reduce the savings from Russian oil. Hence the turn to Venezuela. It gives India options with its oil imports, allowing it to navigate the complex global oil market. And now let's turn our attention to Kenya, like King Charles III of Britain has. The monarch is on a 4-day state visit to Kenya. It's his first visit to a former colony after his ascension to the throne. The trip should be, or could be, a bit uncomfortable for him because of the dark history of British rule in Kenya. We'll get to that in a moment, but first let's tell you what happened today. Charles arrived in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, last night. Today he was given a ceremonial welcome by Kenyan President William Ruto. A red carpet was laid out. There was a 21-gun salute. All the signs of a colonial hangover seemed to be there. But then came the reminder of the legacy of British colonialism. Charles laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior. It is a memorial to honor those who lost their lives in the quest for freedom. Freedom from the British Empire. The memorial stands at the place where Kenya declared independence. So Charles laying a wreath there has great symbolic value. But is that where he will stop? At mere symbolism? Charles is expected to do more. Buckingham Palace says he will try, and I'm quoting, try to deepen his understanding of how Britain mistreated Kenya. He will also address the quote-unquote painful aspects of the UK-Kenya relationship during this trip. That's how Buckingham Palace worded it. Painful aspects. Quite the understatement. Brutal, bloody or barbaric seem more accurate. Painful is a very mild description of British colonialism. Kenya gained independence from the British in 1963. It came after years of struggle. The worst period was between 1952 and 1960. It is known as the Mau Mau Rebellion or the Kenyan Emergency. The rebellion years saw about 90,000 Kenyans executed, tortured or maimed. That's according to the Kenyan Human Rights Commission. Britain, of course, refutes that number, despite being shown evidence.
Kenya Human Rights Commission has responded to that need by providing a detailed description of all the atrocities, of all the injustices to do with land and many other things. Now that he has that from us, we would like him now to come back and saying, well, I've got much more deeper understanding than I expected, and we are demanding an apology. Kenyan people.
Surprisingly, the UK has acknowledged some of the torture and murder. In 2013, the UK paid about $24 million to some 5,000 survivors. Not out of the goodness of their hearts, of course. The Kenyans sued the UK and won that case. But it was a step towards reconciliation. Charles is expected to make more amends during this visit.
In fact, we don't request. In fact, we have to demand a public apology from the government of British because of the atrocities they meted on our people. The first one is an apology. After the apologies, we also expect a reparation.
So how far will Charles go to heal the wounds of the past? He's seen as more open to admitting fault than his predecessors. But will he come out and apologize? Will he endorse reparations? Or will this trip just be a PR exercise for the new king? The next few days should be telling. What do militaries typically make news for? Their arsenal, their preparedness, their budgets, their deployments. How about their food orders? Like where they source their ration from or where they buy their fish. The US military is in the headlines for this. They're bulk buying fish from Japan, not because Tokyo is offering some big discount. It's more of a political statement, a show of solidarity. Until recently, the biggest buyer of fish from Japan was China. But now China is boycotting Japanese seafood, and the US is trying to mitigate the economic damage. Our next report tells you more.
In 2011, Japan's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant was crippled by a tsunami. The plant had 1.34 million tons of nuclear wastewater. For over a decade, the wastewater simply sat there with nowhere to go. But in August this year, Japan finally went ahead with its controversial plan. It began releasing the treated radioactive wastewater into the Pacific. And China didn't like this one bit. It has been a fierce critic of Japan's discharge plan. So, immediately after the release, it imposed a blanket ban on Japanese seafood. And this is still wreaking havoc on Japan's fishing industry. You see, the Japanese seafood market is worth about $56 billion. Before the ban, China was the biggest importer of Japanese seafood. Last year, it imported seafood worth about $571 million. But right after the ban, a sharp fall came. In August itself, Japan faced a loss of about $14 million. It's been 2 months since. Japan is still struggling with oversupply and declining value. So now, the US has stepped in. It wants to help. As a first step, it will buy Japanese seafood for its military in the area, starting with scallops. Japan's scallop sector is under mounting financial stress. Scallops are the most high-value seafood, and they heavily depend on the Chinese market. Since the ban, their prices have fallen by about 27%. Now, in this fishy war, scallops are America's greatest weapon. But will it be enough? The US will purchase only about 900 kilos of scallops. That's a tiny fraction of what Japan exported to China last year. Japan exported about 90 million kilos of scallops to China. And America gets this. It claims this is only the first step and that purchases will ramp up.
We'll be in this area of scallops, but it will then broaden to all types of fish, be sold in all the commissaries across the United States bases, 17 of them. It will be served and stored on our ships for the sailors when they go out. And it will also be available on farmers market. So it starts with scallops, but works through all the fish products.
Even so, it's hardly about what kind of fish America wants. All of this is a token gesture. The US is actively fighting an economic war with China.
Do I think this is the answer, full stop? No. China will continue its economic coercion. But the best way we have proven in all the instances to kind of wear out China's economic coercion is come to the aid and assistance of the targeted country or industry. So this is one step.
And again, China doesn't like this either.
About the US ambassador to Japan, it is the responsibility of diplomats to promote friendship between countries, rather than to smear other countries and sow discord.
China says its ban on imports was motivated by food safety fears, despite Japan's relentless explanations on the treated water safety levels and the UN's nuclear watchdog vouching for the water release. China is not budging, but neither is Japan. It says Tokyo will continue to pressure China so that Beijing lifts the seafood import ban. In the meantime, America's help is bound to do some good, if not in terms of finances, then optics. Even so, China would rather give testy responses to this than taste Japanese fish.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Washington, D.C., the Bidens celebrated Halloween with trick-or-treaters at the White House. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's son turned up as Ukrainian President Zelensky at the event. In Brazil, a swollen waterfall engulfed walkways that take tourists to this natural spectacle. And a deer made a surprise entrance at a Wisconsin restaurant, scaring away diners. Finally, we're taking you back in history on this day in 1984. Former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her own security guards. It happened in the aftermath of the Golden Temple being stormed in Operation Blue Star. Gandhi's assassination led to shockwaves across the nation. It led to some of the worst communal violence that India has ever seen. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
ये तो आप लोगों ने कर दिया महिला उसमें
warm welcome. You're watching Breaking on News 18. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. We bring you some breaking inputs coming in right now from Jammu and Kashmir. As we are learning, the terrorists fired upon Head Constable Ghulam Mohammad Dar today, who was working with Jammu and Kashmir police. He was shot dead near his residence in North Kashmir's Baramulla district. He was shifted to a sub-district hospital in Tangmarg for treatment, where he succumbed to his injuries. Remember, this is the third shooting in the last 3 days. The